Okay, good evening. The time is 6:08 p.m. and we're going to call this special board meeting to order and establish a quorum. Those present are Becky Stevenson, Clint Scheib, Donna Gilliam, Melissa Sartain, Lacey Gosh, Dan Reinhardt, and Joel Frederick. Announcement that this meeting has been duly called and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meeting Act, Section 551.043 of the Texas Government Code. At this time, do we have any public participation?
We do not.
Okay, and without public participation, we're going to go ahead and go into our discussion item 3A, the 89th legislative update with Ms. Julia Grizzard from Hope Casey. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I apologize for being late. I'm glad you all had some food at least, and thank you for arranging that too. I appreciate that. So we had quite a bit go on this last legislative session, and I'll just come over here and might stand/sit. But it was quite a session, as I am sure Dr. Epley has caught you up on a lot of the happenings, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of the newspaper headlines about what's going on with some of the major headlines. So we'll talk through some of those bills. But I did include in the PowerPoint, which you all will get, of course, a copy of, as well as our post-legislative packet that's coming out in the next week or so. But I wanted to touch on some of the big highlights and then try to leave some time at the end for Q&A, particular bills that you were following, or maybe, hey, I heard this bill and what happened to it, in case there are bills that maybe died that you were following and that we can talk about too. The other thing I'll say is that one of the things that that we really learned this session, we'll talk about at the end how we can kind of learn throughout the interim, is what is most impactful is, and if you all had visited the Capitol, is the time that we spent there. We were able to make small tweaks on stuff. What we learned this session is towards the end is where the biggest impact is on a lot of the discussions around conference committee. And a lot of the things that came up I'm lucky enough to work with the Guadalupe County Education Coalition to really help bring a lot of the things that you all have shared with Dr. Epley to the Capitol, and I'll try to highlight those as we go through the presentation. Overall, here is some of the things that we followed at the team at Casey, but then also for GCEC. More bills than ever filed this legislative session, 9,000 bills total. Of course, it hit a record. They kind of climb up every single session. All super good ideas, but we followed 1,500 of them. Of those 1,500, 148 passed. Now, the governor, who had until June 22nd to sign them, signed 131. That doesn't mean that the other go away. He can let a bill just go into action. And sometimes he does that if he doesn't find something that he wants to target somebody, or doesn't like the policy, which we'll talk about that in a second. And so all of those went through. The only two he did veto having to do with education were 974 and House Bill 353. Not too big of a bills, nothing that I think is going to change our everyday, unless anybody who is interested in serving on the county appraisal district. I think you're good. No, there was one that said it's okay if folks who are associated with ISDs can serve on county appraisal. He vetoed that one. He also vetoed the criminal trespass, which was written so expansively that in his veto note, it said it gave the possibility of going to the Capitol and getting a criminal trespass warning because school children were there and you hadn't gotten a background check or had approval to be around the kids. So it did veto that one for a policy reason. Of which he does. So in the last day, he also vetoed a line item on the budget, which we'll talk about in just a second. So overall, big concepts that passed that were the large topics. Of course, the state budget, they're constitutionally required to pass that every single session. And then House Bill 2, which we're probably hearing a lot about. It's going to be like the new House Bill 3 in many ways because of the policy that it set in motion. But for the most part, this is our teacher pay bill, right? Started out as our school finance omnibus bill, really turned into majority school our teacher pay bill. Vouchers passed with like a merry a spark at the really towards the beginning even of session, which was interesting. A couple of things around property tax relief, and then we had some big movements towards student discipline as well as parent rights, which we'll talk about in a second, having to do with a lot of the disciplinary issues that happened over the interim. If you all followed the story about the teacher losing her eye, and some of the other stories that had recently come about. And virtual education we'll talk a little bit about, because I do think the overlap between virtual education, some things that are happening in the kind of voucher ecosphere, and then what that does to the charter market is, I think, especially important for schools that are in more rural spaces, and what that can do for families who are maybe going between homeschooling, voucher, traditional ISDs, and where you all potentially fit in that or could fit in that. We'll talk also about student health and athletics. We'll talk about some changes to curriculum and instruction, specifically being in a library, around some regulations around library books that actually did pass through this session, as well as we'll talk a little bit about some personnel regulations for teachers. And of course, along all that, you guys have tons of super fun training for board members. Because you guys love all of your training, I'm sure. Every second of it, you're like, yes, more training. So what didn't pass? House Bill 4, assessment and accountability, really went until the very last hours of session. And so we'll talk a little bit about what was in that bill. A couple of reasons. I want to show you kind of how far apart the House and the Senate are on the concepts. And also, some deep misunderstandings, honestly, about how assessment works and the resulting accountability. But then also, we're hearing a rumor that it might be added to the upcoming special session, which on my previous, or 2 slides ago, you'll see there is one special session coming up, nothing so far to do with K-12. Couple of other things that didn't pass, but of course we can address any questions if you have them. So state budget, there's nothing, we kind of go through the budget very at a high level, and we go through budget night on both sides of the Capitol, the Senate and the House. And that's when we really start to dig into some of what's called riders, right? So you've got the base budget, right? And what happens in the base budget, all of the general revenue or the general operating capital for all of our agencies. And then there are particular programs that either are added by agencies. So for example, teacher incentive allotment started as teacher incentive programs. There is a broadband connection, right? And there are riders specific to that. I mention that because oftentimes we will find programs that ordinarily really should be legislation, often are put into riders that then go under the control of the agency. So it's always an interesting thing to kind of track how much is added into different particular parts of the government. The second reason I mention that is because if you've seen any of the headlines recently, you've seen that Governor Abbott vetoed a summer lunch program. Now the headlines are Governor Abbott vetoes food for kids on the summer, right? Like a lot of the headlines are fairly frightening. And again, Julie's opinion, I would not have done this, right? I think to give you an example or idea of what this program is, $60 million is what it would have covered 50% of just the administrative cost of operating an increased support for summer feeding for all Texas children who are on free and reduced lunch. That's around $400 million for the state. So the state's only responsibility is chipping in $60 million, right, in order to make all of that money come into the state. And it would have been distributed very similarly to, if you remember, if you were part of the board during the summer after COVID, when TEA was distributing SNAP benefits, you all had additional access to funding for snacks and weekend programs. That is what that program would have done. It would have been implemented into 2027. So I say that because it's not messing with anything you're currently doing, right, or currently the schools are doing during summer for summer program feeding and snacks. but it did X out that program that would have been implemented, which did come up in a rider, right? And so that's another reason why he can kind of line item veto. The other thing that we saw was TEA reports on how many full-time employees they have every year. And so altogether at the end of this legislative session, TEA's full-time employees went up by 176. That's not total employees, that's how many it increased by. So just a little FYI. There was additional money for SHARS in the first version of the budget, or of the supplemental budget, which is House Bill 500. Those always kind of work together. But the Senate, when it came over to the Senate, they removed it. And they said it was more of a federal government program and that schools should have been aware. I'm just the messenger of that, right? So I don't believe that, but I share that with you because I think it's important to have that context when we start communicating or communicate more often with both our senators and our representatives, is that's right, the position that they're coming from for a court case that was a decade old, right, from things that were submitted that long ago that you all are currently paying for. Okay, so let's get into House Bill 2. Lots of stuff in House Bill 2, ton of stuff in House Bill 2. It's a very, very prescriptive bill, and I tried to break it down in kind of 6 rough sections that we can cover. I'm sure you've gotten have you gotten a lot of kind of overview of House Bill 2? Yes, kind of yes and ish. Okay, so I'll go over it fairly quickly, but if you guys have questions, because I do want to get into some of the other parts, other bills that are not making as many headlines that I want to make sure you all know about. The one thing I'll say overall about House Bill 2 is it really signals the direction that we currently see state policy going for school funding. That every cent of money, right, that's coming into school budgets is now attached to a particular program, right? And there are several examples of that in this bill, and several examples of that in other bills. But before, right, our House Bill 3 days in 2019, where school districts receive an $1,000 VA increase, it's probably not going to happen for quite some time unless we see some different folks, right? Just very frankly. Because the current people that are in office believe that the only funding that should go to school should be directly attached to particular programs, right, or particular outcomes. Now, there are all kinds of policy questions and issues with that. That's for another time, maybe over, dessert later. But that is what we think is going on. The reason that that's important, and especially important for you all, is how do I know what my district is doing right off the bat about programs? I've got to be always ready with data, right? I have to follow every single piece of dollars, right? I have to make sure also my CFO or my finance folks, who are wonderful and wonderfully nerdy, can explain it to the everyday person as to how we're spending. And that's where you all are critical, right, as your representation of your constituents. I want to make sure what you're telling me as school officials is translatable to my neighbor, right? And so that way, the other positive kind of thing about this is that we can start to show the gulf between what you all spend on your programs and what the state has funded. Okay, so we'll talk about a couple of opportunities, or ways, not opportunities, but ways that we'll need to do that in the coming years. Overall, the basic allotment, as many of you all know, in order to keep up with inflation, would have had to gone up by $1,500. It went up by $55. No cheers? That's right, that's fine. Cool. The first year it is guaranteed at $55. You're like, thanks a lot. But I mention that because in the outgoing years, if you all are familiar with the golden penny allotment, and I'm sorry if you are. I know, right? Everybody's like, golden what? But school board, you guys know golden pennies well. That increase that you all experienced from 2019 to 2021, that benefit that you got from your golden penny increasing is now going into this new allotment, okay? So we tried our best to really explain multiple times how this is not new money. Now in the first year it is, right? First year you get that, just guaranteed it is new money. But whereas before you were getting that increase from golden pennies, right, that was unrecaptured, now you all are frozen at a particular rate, and the increase that districts would have received is now distributed to everybody's basic allotment through this new guaranteed yield increment adjustment allotment. Another example, right? We don't want to give districts, right, unrecapture, untracked money. Now we're going to send it through the formulas, right, in order to track where it's going and how they're spending it. There is now an allotment for basic cost, not the basic allotment. It's the allotment for basic cost. Because that's cute, right? ABC? Yep. Hey! Now, good news, bad news. Done by enrollment. First allotment that we really truly have in enrollment. There are other things that are handled by enrollment, kind of. This one is truly handled by enrollment. The other thing that this is, again, this is future, this is looking out the next couple of years, this is long game kind of thing, is the amount of things that the allotment for basic cost it can be utilized for is going to completely, right, outpace what the current allotment is. But now we can start to say, here are all the things that I can cover with the allotment for basic costs, but here's how much the state is giving me, right? And when we told that, that same story with special education, right? And we've really hammered that over and over and over again, so much where TEA is like, yes, I agree, it's a $1.7 billion gap every year. That is when we really started to get a conversation moving on special education. And so that's another thing where we can still, right, talk about the impact of inflation, the cost of insurance, right, skyrocketing, utilities, right, all of the things that are covered under that new allotment. It increased the small and mid-sized allotment by around $300 million. Not as much as the original amount, but it was a slight bump for our small and mid-sized districts. Majority of the bill went, of course, into teacher pay raises, which you all have probably talked so much about. So unless you all have questions, we don't necessarily have to go into this. I've included the definition from statute. As the classroom teacher, this is pulled directly from that in case your folks have questions. And then of course it expands to, right, basically if a district has an 1882, that's what this contract, right, language is about. As well as this not required to hold a certificate is basically covering our charters. The state's charters. Closest PEIMS definition is the 087, but I imagine that will be adjusted. Here's one thing that I think, I heard it in a presentation I was giving with one of my colleagues, and I feel like this helped me address any questions or concerns. No one is going to get the allotment that doesn't generate the allotment, right? Okay. That helps me think through it because I think our instincts is like shouldering new regulations is, wait a minute, who gets it? How many people do I give it out to? But the way that you're generating the allotment, right, is by teachers, right, by who qualifies. So that I think gave some folks some like, okay, it's not that I'm gonna have to dole it out to somebody who I don't have the money for, who is not getting the money. Now, how you advocate for particular people who are in weird spaces, right, like if they're federally funded or if they're part-time, that becomes, I think, the next kind of step of, are we advocating for the right teachers that are doing unique roles in our campuses? Okay, TIA program, Commissioner Marath loves the TIA program. It got, I think, a $2 billion increase overall, expansion in the budget, as well as an enhanced TIA. If you guys have questions, we can talk about that. There is, in his continued testimony, at the beginning of session, he talked about two things. He talked about the difference between uncertified teachers and certified teachers and the performance of uncertified teachers and certified teachers. And for most of us that have been working in public education for a long time went, yeah, agreed, right? And the other thing is cell phones, and we'll talk about that. So this makes me think, right, the more that we are paying attention to every time he testifies in front of anybody, including the SBOE, which means sometimes, yes, I have to watch the SBOE. No, just kidding. I do. It's not my funnest days. That is what he's going to continue to push, not only publicly but also privately. So this particular prohibition got into House Bill 2 and several other places. It was in maybe 5 other bills. Now, you all may be dealing with some of that, maybe not dealing with some of that. For our districts that have a wide gulf of uncertified teachers, they're mainly in more of our urban folks, are really hard to staff areas or very far out rural spaces. The continued advice is that we've got now 2 sessions to really either push back this deadline or see some of the residency programs and grow your own programs that are also funded in this bill start to hopefully work. So there is a new allotment to incentivize districts to partner, as well as $1,000 for every uncertified teacher that you get certified within a particular time frame. So there's also that particular incentive as well. There are several things that happen with early education. If you all were following House Bill 123 by Chairman Dutton, sometimes if you all are on like email serves and you're like, watch out for 123 or watch out for this other bill. So I always say the numbers, not expecting you to have bill numbers memorized. I don't know, unless you are, then you're a fellow nerd. Congratulations, welcome to the club. But one of those was an early education bill that implemented new assessments and then had a very unique funding stream that we'll talk about in just a second. So House Bill 2 basically ate up all those bills and became larger when it took on these 2 bills during the committee substitute process. So now at the K through 3 level, school districts are required to implement, right, these new pre, middle, and end of year assessments. Now, one of the things that we pushed for, thanks to a lot to Dr. Epley's work and others about like, what are you all already doing? Because if you're using MAP, can we get some allowances to utilize tests that are already being implemented, things that you all are already doing? What qualifies as the kind of intentional or the intervention services, there's the word, that you all are doing after a student, right? So a lot of that you all are already doing, but you will have to track it probably more aggressively than you have before. And so that is implemented K through 3 as a requirement. Here is where the wonky person in me is like, why would you do it that way? But this early intervention allotment, here's another allotment, right, that gets tracked and reported on. Anytime you have a student who has failed or not reached 2 consecutive benchmarks, you have to give them intervention services. Now again, as I mentioned before, a lot of it is intervention services that you all are already doing, right, like push in, pull outs kind of thing. There's still similar requirements to 45-45 where they have to have access to recess and music and fine arts, right, same thing as before. But this time, you guys get $250 per kid. No? Okay, that's cool. Yeah, we'll cheer later. Now, it's capped at 10%. We tried to talk to Dutton and Buckley about how much intervention services actually cost. They were like, no, I don't think so. We're like, yeah, see, here's the bill. But and it's hard to talk about like sweat equity in hours, but it does cost way more than $250. And of course, your students are not, of course, but students who are receiving dyslexia services don't receive this. Now, here's where, while that's a low number, that's not the weirdo part. That's a technical term, by the way, is that the students that fail the assessments and attended a school from K through 3, if they still are not meeting those benchmarks, then you might see, or you will see, a funding reduction by potentially $400 or $400 times 2 if they fail both the math and the literacy. Now, your entitlement overall is reduced less for special education students, but the idea or this concept is we're going to give you money, but it's not real money. It's just a loan. It's just an investment. Yeah. Right? We're just investing in you, and if you don't show us the investment, you have to pay the money back. Yeah. Yeah. And still good luck with the kid, though. Right?
So it says private tutoring. So is the expectation that the parents receive the $400 for us to provide the private tutoring?
Yes.
So they're not taking the money away. We just have to pay direct services.
Great question. TEA, as they explained it, will be directing those particular programs. You won't be. It's that TEA will reduce your entitlement in order to facilitate that.
Okay.
Now, part of the administrative rules that we don't have yet, it does say that you all can have certified teachers that could fulfill those private tutoring services.
Oh, like the reading academies.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Or, so for example, where my son goes to school, they use Class Dojo, right? And so you could have like a discounted rate for Class Dojo tutoring services that could potentially qualify for some of those intervention services. So you can, right, strongly recommend and talk to, right, the parent. There is some overlap with special education services, similar to what we saw with 4545, right, following their IEPs, et cetera. But that's my understanding of it, is it's not that you're giving the money directly to the parent, it's that the state is facilitating the program and your entitlement is lowered, right, in order to facilitate it. Because it's not always an even trade, too, right? So, for example, if the student had failed 2 consecutive assessments in 2nd grade and got that allotment for $250 the very next year, and then failed it in 3rd grade, it's not that there was some even trade between how much money you got and how much money the student will receive. The other thing that House Bill 2, the headlines have said, is around pre-K. That was early education, like K through 2, so let's talk a little bit about pre-K. If you've read any of the summaries from the Senate or the Lieutenant Governor or the Speaker, it says that full-day pre-K is fully funded. And so I was like to say, well, that's kind of, that's like if ever air quotes were used appropriately, it would be for this. Now, did they change the formula in state funding from half day to full day? No, they did not. They did not do that. Instead, what they did is they slightly increased the current early education allotment, right? So think of the early education allotment as a bucket. So they made that bucket slightly bigger, okay? And then now they're going to say, well, everybody's early education allotment is going to go in this big bucket. And we are going to give out the money first to districts who have full day pre-K implemented to cover the cost of their full day pre-K programs for eligible students. Once that is calculated about how much those districts will receive, then we will give out the rest of that bucket for the early education allotment for all of the other stuff, right, that's under that early education allotment. So I do think we do think, all right, we've predicted and we've seen some of this, that there will be winners and losers in this scenario, right? Districts that have really robust full day pre-K programs, that have a lot of qualifying students, will more than likely do well under this early education allotment reallocation. Districts that do not might see a reduction in their early education allotment. The other thing that's happened for full day pre-K programs is starting in 2027-2028, if you all are charging tuition for non-qualifying students, you have to be approved by 4 unnamed intermediary organizations that you all have space available and that you are the least expensive option in the area. I don't think there's necessarily any issue there. You're charging robust amounts of tuition. Some districts are, some districts aren't. Also, if you partnered with any, and private is really key here, a private provider, in this next year, you have to share 85% of that revenue moving forward. Now, there is a possibility that you can ask for a waiver if you have a previously agreed to MOU, but if you're doing anything with like Head Start or things like that, that's different. This is private pre-K providers. Those contracts are now under this control. This is just full disclosure. I think this is a reaction to, if you saw that Texas Monthly article around pre-K and some of that, that's a direct response to that. I don't think it actually has anything to do with some like, oh, these poor private pre-K partners are suffering as a result. I think it is purely to do with some of that conversation.
And Julia, just before we move on from
Yeah.
this, so that the board understands when that early education allotment is reduced, the difference between the pre-K is, yes, you're funding pre-K, but that early education allotment could have funded PD for the teachers of K-3. There was just a lot more flexibility in that. So when you're pulling that money and saying, now we're funding pre-K, but you're doing it with that money, now we are having to find the makeup money for those things that were a much broader topic that could be covered with early educational.
The broader topic allowed us to pay for the reading academies,
Yeah,
Yes.
but they're making us tutor the little guys, so they're shifting it.
yeah.
Yes. And
Instead, the reading academies are done, so your K-3s are fine. We don't need to pump money there. We're going to put it down here.
Yeah, well, so yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because in addition to literary academies, starting in, I believe, 2027,
Numeracy.
don't quote me on that, there will be now numeracy academies
Correct.
as well. There also are some very strict folks, are now rules in statute about when you have to provide stipends. And that's only if you're requiring teachers to do it outside of class. Or outside of school hours, and then you do not have to pay stipends if it's somebody who is not required to take it, an academy. Like if your fourth grade teacher is like, hey, you're gonna get a stipend, you're like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
So there's now clear guidelines for that.
So she was saying that depending on the district, we do better or worse. What are we going to do with this?
I foresee that it's not in our best interest. We don't have a huge amount of that pre-K,
Yeah.
where that other pot for us would have been more beneficial.
Okay.
But as we grow, depending on how this evolves, but
We
again,
have one-
we see how quickly it changes per legislative
We have
session
one class of
to,
2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
24 kids. Yeah.
Now, when you receive that funding, it still goes into that bucket overall, right? So the only time that you're really forced into paying for anything is if you're meeting particular requirements. But so, as an example, one of your kind of neighboring districts does charge tuition. That tuition requirement is a worry for them, and they actually have so many tuition-based pre-K kids that they almost pay for that remaining half. Not quite, but it's a good contribution. So they're worried about that. Now, they do have a lot of qualifying pre-K, so their pre-K students, so their overall bucket might stay roughly the same, but they still want to have that tuition payment coming in, but they can use all of those dollars flexibly.
yeah,
Right?
that's the biggest issue,
Yeah.
is the flexibility of those funds. And to what she's talking about, that's the shift, right? The funds need to be allocated now specifically for this thing and only this thing, and you better track that thing, versus that overarching, it's a flexible pot for you.
Yep.
That's the paradigm shift.
Yep. And I mean, this is I don't have any data to back this up, but I do think part of something that we capture in this shift is we're still under all of the requirements of was it Rider 77, where it requires you all to have low student to teacher ratios, which are all great measures, right? Particularly certified teachers in those spaces, right? Like there are very stringent requirements. So this is another opportunity for you to say, actually it costs us this much to run. So the state pays us this much, right? But here's how much it costs to run our full day pre-K for just qualifying students.
Right.
So that's another opportunity to talk about that goal. I skipped over, but this is important for House Bill 2 does add children of classroom teachers to be eligible for state-funded half-day pre-K. So that does increase your ADA. Now it increases your ADA by 0.5 of those kids, but it is a slight increase and it benefits the formulas overall.
Yes, and yes, she's asking me this, and I said that to y'all in the Friday memo. It is just classroom teachers. So
Yeah.
the controversy in this is your paraprofessionals, your custodians, your bus drivers are like, why not us? And so districts were saying, gosh, we'd love to pick up that cost, but until we know what that is, because especially in a fast growth district like ours, where we incentivize you working for us because now your child can attend here. The issue is not only the financing of paying for all of that, because you can't charge tuition, is where are they going? We don't have a classroom space. We also don't have a teacher. So if I'm keeping those ratios low, depending on how much you open that up, could be 2 other classrooms, 2 other teachers.
Yeah.
So
It's a trade-off.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a challenge for us, and this late kind of gift,
Yeah.
in that we hadn't planned for that. But going forward, we'll be
Yeah.
able to do some surveying and figure it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you get new staff coming in, they happen to have a pre-K and they're eligible and they want to come.
Yep.
And you have to do it this year?
It's a requirement.
Okay.
Yep. And you'll get to that, then your early education allotment goes up by not only that, you get the half-day ADA, but your early education allotment goes up by that additional half-day cost.
Yep.
So again, you're not gonna necessarily, because again, I'm not encapsulating all the things that you pay with your early education allotment, but there's no kid that's gonna come into the system that's not generating additional money, they're just gonna generate it in 2 separate buckets for some reason. I also think this is another example of why translating a lot of this stuff to your community, right, is really, really key, right? Have your CFO or have your folks talk to your community about, here's what happened to our early education allotment. Here is the only thing they qualified, not you all, it's not a decision that Navarro made, but here is what the state, right, qualified as being eligible for, and go through that list. Because a lot of parents don't know, right? A lot of community members don't know. They think it's a district decision. So that's a question that comes up quite a lot. School safety allotment did double. Per ADA, it went up to $20 rather than $10, and the per campus allotment more than doubled from $15,000 to $33,540. I will say, on average, Texas schools spend around $100 per student on school safety. So this does not still cover the gap in spending, but another incentive for us to say, here's all the things we pay for, right? It's more than just PEMS 52, right? The Safety and Security Code, all of the things that are in school safety. Here is what we're utilizing that funding for, and here's how much the gap is. Okay, let's talk a little bit. This is a very wordy slide, but this is really a bit more for your stuff later. Let me just give you a quick overview of special education. Anybody heard about this service intensity allotment, service intensity model? Yeah, put your hand down, Dr. Adley. Of course you have. Okay, so currently special education services we pay based on location, right? So all mainstream classroom special education students get paid 1 weight. And then all other service, right, all other places, right, in the special education spectrum, right, get paid different weights based on where they're located. Now, within that mainstream room, there is a significant variety of need, right? From the student who maybe has some needing of additional time on a test, or a learning disability that is really needs some more help and occasional assistance, versus a student who needs a full-time paraprofessional with them, but they are in a mainstream classroom. Overall, this location-based payment system disincentivizes the state, right, from really properly serving children overall. And we've seen that statewide. That's because you all are under incredible pressure, right, from the state and not even getting paid nearly enough of what you are tasked with implementing according to the federal government, right? You're federally required to implement. So what House Bill 2 does is it puts into place something called a service intensity allotment. So instead of it's like 5 or 6 weights that we have in special education, it's now going to go to 8. 4 of which should be, right, within the mainstream classroom, giving us the ability to now, instead of being paid by where the student is, based on what the student's service is, or what service the student is receiving, right? A vastly better system that has been reviewed now for the last 4 years through 2 different commissions. It's ridiculous that it took this long to pass. That's my professional opinion, but that was a joke. It's not, the ridiculous is not a proper descriptor, but it is now in law. That first is implemented in the school year 26-27, and the reason that is not because the state actually wanted to implement it this year, And the group that advocates for special education directors said if you do that, half of the field will leave because your special education director and department is going to, over the next year, go through every single IEP to determine, right, potentially what weight or where they would fall in that spectrum. So it is going to be an immense amount of work. They're going to need some support, right, overall from your campuses and from your folks to go through that process. So starting in 26-27 is when the first, right, we'll see that service intensity allotment go into play. Now, I would love to say that's when we're going to close the gap as the state. This is great. You guys are actually going to get what you're required to spend according to the federal government. And I would be very wrong because in the bill in 26-27, the state is limited to only increase special education funding by $250 from the previous year. And just as a reminder, or if you haven't seen this presentation, we can go through this, but the gap between what school districts are required to implement and the money that you receive yearly is $1.7 billion.
So 250 million is not going to cut it.
Okay, so 250, right, is not going to be deeply felt in this first year. So our goal, and really a lot of folks' number one, number two goal for next session is making sure that these weights accurately reflect, right, covering that gap. Okay, and that's another reason as to, yes, these weights, the way they're allocated make a lot of sense, but they are not funded to cover the vast need, right, that we have in our special education spaces. So that's covered in this slide. The other thing that is covered in this slide is that there is, I'm like, is it covered in this slide? It's somewhere. I'm so sorry, that's too wordy of a slide. I'll work on that. But now for the first time, special education evaluations are reimbursed. You all were not getting reimbursed for that before. You'll now get $1,000 per evaluation, which is good. Now evaluations cost between $3,000 and $5,000, but it's not zero. Not that makes it better.
Per student?
Per student, yes, sir. Yeah.
There's no stipulation on who does the evaluation, whether it's
Yeah.
a contractor or a school employee?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, can be contractor or school employee. Vast majority of the state is using contractors. We do not pay enough as a school system to have diagnosticians. They get vastly more money in the private space, hence why I think a lot of those evaluation costs are that high. The other thing that I wanted you to be aware of, we'll talk about vouchers in a second, is that you all are required, if you have a potential ESA student who wants to receive special education services, that public schools are responsible for doing the evaluations in the new voucher bill. So you are reimbursed the $1,000, but it is your responsibility to do that.
Is that where the kid lives or what school, like in the?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So if you have folks in your attendance zone, yeah, you won't suddenly get an influx of kids.
I mean, but it
from-
would be like if the kids go to private school in New Braunfels, we would still do them here.
Yes, and if their attendance tracked to, they would have gone, their home school is
Yeah.
Navarro.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so other stuff, just kind of other items that are covered. There are JROTC courses that have been added to the CTE allotment. I think that's hopefully a good thing. P-TECH increase from 50 to 150.
That is great for us. We have a P-TECH.
Good. Okay,
Yes.
good. There's some good news. Yay.
Yes.
There was a repeal. There's another repeal. That 30% requirement for teacher raises that went away. So that was repealed. So you're not going to have to give 30% of that $55 allotment to teachers, counselors, nurses, librarians. That went away with the $4.2 billion for the teacher compensation. The other thing that was repealed is the 55% direct spend requirement in compensatory education. We don't have to go into that necessarily. It gives some districts more flexibility. I think that they thought that was kind of like a gift. I'm not sure that it necessarily is, but I think we'll see a variety of reporting as to the impact. And then there were, of course, some other provisions. If you're like, Julia, that's not enough HB2, I need more, please
I
give
did
me
send you
more
the full
stuff.
bill, so.
That wasn't, I need to know all of it. You can go to this URL and you can read a 20-page side-by-side comparing current law to HB2. It was written by some really brilliant and frankly just very pretty people. That was it. I was like, good job, Leo and Josh. So the other thing for very nerdy folks, for your finance people, I'm sure hopefully Paul's already dug into this stuff and if he has any questions, but there is a school finance template to really talk about what the growth might be over the next 2 years.
And we like that template. That template is very positive for us.
Good, okay, good, I'm glad. Okay, so because everybody loves to talk about property tax, we're gonna go into property tax, but I'm gonna do it really quickly because I know we're already at the 7. And when do we need to like cut off? I'm sorry.
We
you guys on.
started late, so we can, it's like 7:10.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm not going to go into property tax. Just know that there are some hold harmlesses that preserve from the past. There are some hold harmlesses that have not. So this does increase the homestead exemption from 100 to 140. That's if the voters voted in November. We've put that in our statement of our summary of finance template. There is also one that mandates the increased exemption for over 65 and disabled. I know that impacts you all because you have a lot of those homes and rooftops. So I want to make sure that you all see that, but it does preserve the hold harmless. However, both of these, I believe, are time bound, right? So you all did your bond, but you've already paid it. It's already processing, so it is considered in your hold harmless. If you do another bond in the future after September 1, 2025, it is not considered in your hold harmless unless we go back to the Capitol, right, and advocate for that date that's in statute to be moved up. Okay, so I just want you all to be aware of that if you're considering a bond in the future. This we don't know really the impact yet, but it's the business property exemption. I don't think it's going to impact you all a lot because of who you serve. We can go through this stuff, but hey, this is good. The threshold increased to 100K. No, right, that's cool. ESAs, I'm sure you all have heard a lot about. We can, if you all have any questions about that, we can go through it. But I did want to go into some new requirements, especially around school libraries. I want to talk a little bit about the parent rights and a little bit about the student discipline, and then I promised you guys I'd leave time for questions, and I just had so much fun with House Bill 2. Senate Bill 13 is the school library bill. If you do have parents who are requesting you to start the local school library advisory council, right, then you do have to start this local school library advisory council. And it gives you rules, extensive guidance and what that needs to look like and who needs to serve on it. But I would think the most kind of immediate thing that you all might need to look at in terms of your technology and parental access is now it makes access to record, books, and materials a parent right in Chapter 26. So you need those records to be kept and need to be parent accessible. They need to be able to ask for restrictions on their child's access to a specific library material, as well as you have to establish a formal process, and there is some timing, I believe, in this bill as to what you have to follow when a particular piece of library material is challenged. But it does allow you to utilize your instructional materials and technology allotment in order, because I know that that's in abundance. That was another sarcastic, sorry. Is the later it goes, the more sarcastic I become directly. Okay, cool.
It's my favorite thing about you, Julia.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Senate Bill 25 had a ton of stuff in it, but I wanted to point out that you all are doing a lot of this stuff already, that students must have at least 30 minutes of physical activity or 135 minutes per week. This did have in an early version of the bill increasing your PE, but that was taken out of the bill at the last phase. And so that hopefully that doesn't really dramatically change how you're doing a lot of your scheduling. It does require for you all to have a one half elective, right? So you have to offer it, but the students aren't required to take it. In an earlier version, it was required. It was pointed out multiple times that we don't have a lot of half credit. It would make not a lot of sense for high school students to take it. We don't have to go through that one. Let's talk a little bit about virtual education. The virtual education bill completely redid how virtual education is handled in the state of Texas. Brand new chapter, completely took out a lot of requirements. It only allowed for like 4 people to be officially providers that are outside of ISDs. Now, individual ISDs actually can create virtual schools. So that's everybody can elect to do that. There are particular requirements for what has to be covered in that virtual school and how those teachers are trained. I'm not saying you all are chomping at the bit in order to do that. However, if you do have a school district who has done that, and they're offering courses that might be interesting to a Navarro ISD student, what this allows you to do is create an MOU with that district for a Navarro ISD student to enroll in that district for that one course, right? So that opens up the ability, right, for those students to earn credits in different ways. I don't know what this marketplace is going to look like, right, in the next couple of years, but it does put more control in the ISD hands, rather than when you have a student who wanted the virtual option, you kind of had to unenroll them and just say good luck, right? And so now you're able to help them, right, with what's available in the kind of wider market, depending on, again, what the next couple of years looks like. I do have some concerns with ESAs happening at the same time and what this does for virtual charters, or virtual charters that are now exploring potentially being accredited private schools, right? Yeah, go ahead.
So the current funding that's provided for TXVSN of like $250 per student, and you're required to provide that, that's all gone as of September 1? If they abolish the TXVSN, then
so it's not all gone. So the how students are enrolled still remain. So those systems remain.
Okay.
But the fluidity of being able to, so I know before, like if a student had to go into TXVN, their diploma didn't say Navarro.
Correct.
Right? It said, was it like Dallas or something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
For that one
so
course,
it's possible that eventually that student to graduate from Navarro ISD, I think that's going to be a couple years off to kind of work out how that is. The only change when it comes to funding is that instead of completion funding, now, and this potentially could increase the cost, right? I don't know unless I know like how many students you all are doing that funding for, but into enrollment funding.
And I guess the reg will address if Navarro enrolls one of our kids somewhere else, whether the ADA goes to the other district or whether we pay a tuition-based. The reg will state that?
Yes,
or?
yeah. More than likely, the way that it was proposed is that was the MOU, is to facilitate you all paying for the cost of, right, like grading that kid and doing it. I don't know what that looks like or how they'll prorate that, and that could be up to each individual district, which... Okay, so a couple other curriculum requirements around anti-communism, economics and personal finance, as well as being an elected official. I did want to talk through this parental rights bill that's getting, I think it will get some more attention in the coming weeks, potentially legally. There were some additional things that were added. It was always included, the defined diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what is prohibited is focused really on more the hiring procedures and recruitment procedures. But I do think that it will have kind of an overall chilling effect on a lot of things, right, in curriculum and systems. It did have some additional disciplinary requirements for violating the past SB 3, which was that critical race theory ban bill. It does also update the parent consent notices and grievance processes. So you all may have a parent grievance process already adopted, but there are specific requirements in terms of days to respond, right? And days that you have to not only respond to the campus, then to the district, to the school board, and there's a potential that that parent can have so many grievances and not be satisfied that they can go to the SPOE and potentially the commissioner. right? So it creates that line more officially rather than kind of loosely in an admin reg situation that Chapter 26 did in the past. It defines, here's where I think we're going to get some legal pushback around the defined social transitioning. This came at the Senate. Basically, any school employees or contractors cannot support a student's social transition. The thing that I think it will be pushed against is whether it is the parent's request or not, right? So if a parent has requested to call a student by different pronouns, if a employee doesn't want to do that, they don't have to do that, and in fact, this bill says don't do that. It also says that school district employees can't encourage students from doing something that is different from their sex at birth. And so, again, I don't know if that means I can't wear pants anymore, right? Like, if that kind of thing, I think there will be some pushback there about the interpretation, how loose the language is, but we'll keep our eye on that. The other thing is around defining psychological and psychiatric examinations, which sounds very technical, but it expands that definition to basically say anything that has to do with mental health curriculum. And so if you're doing anything that has to do with mental health curriculum, or you want the student or the counselor wanted to come visit with the student, that now has to have a parental consent for it. Now, it does say that the teachers and counselors can ask how you're doing, right? That's not banned with this, but it expands this definition to be really more inclusive. That sounds very technical, and it's not in code.
Can that just be like at the beginning of the year, like just a blanket thing, we're going to talk about this, or does it have to?
I think for curriculum, yes. So if your school counselors or your teachers are saying we're doing this unit on feelings for your early education, absolutely. But I do know that as things come up and you want a student to go see the counselor, like my son had some difficulty transitioning at the beginning of the year. So we went to see his school counselor because of a recommendation of a teacher, which is great. I fully support. That would have, in order for him to have done that, they would have had to call me and ask for my permission in order for him to go see the counselor now. So that is now a requirement for our school districts to implement.
Yep.
Now, there's again some exceptions if the student is in crisis, right, or having suicidal ideations, right, there's some exceptions there, but just that visitation still requires the parental consent. That particular piece of statute was fought vehemently against for the last several sessions, and this omnibus bill is the first time we've seen it be successful. Facility usage report, which we can talk about, but I do think if you all are adopting bonds in the future, if you do have students who want to come inter-district transfer, this is something that is going to be utilized for that. I would highly recommend your ops people or you folks are as detailed as possible for this, right? We've talked about that. Like if you have an elementary school that you're transitioning to a new facility, that you talk about that in the comments, right? Don't assume that anybody knows anything about your district. And it asks you for certain square footage. I think you should also include the date that it was created. There are buildings that we have in certain parts of the state that are not fit for students to be a part of. That should be a part of this facility usage report. I'm running out of time, but I can talk to you a little bit about the politics of that later and kind of where that came from. Some more stuff about, now I will say that this is already under a court case right now, so you just pause on that, on the 10 Commandments, if they are donated to you. I didn't mean to do that. Did I kill it? I killed it.
Uh-oh.
No,
That was
No,
like
it's the
your
connection.
done.
It's
panel
on
just
your-
turned off.
Okay.
Just hit the red button.
The blinking red.
Yeah, on the TV.
And just
Sorry.
go to sleep.
Oh, it's like I'm so bored with this presentation. I'm gonna turn off. Just everybody go home immediately.
We were set on a time limit, so
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, that's where you're like, and that's how we tell you goodbye. Here are some school board requirements. I think you all are doing most of this for your school board requirements in terms of posting your agenda, your voting record, and your attendance. The only difference is the minutes are required to be posted within 7 days.
And I'm
Which is-
assuming that would be unapproved, otherwise we would have to have a meeting to approve and then another meeting to approve the minutes for the meeting that we approve the
Yep.
minutes.
Exactly.
Well,
Yes.
not
Every
posting
7
and
days, you
recording
guys
it,
would see each other. Yes, they can be
We are.
posted as
They're on
notes.
YouTube. Yeah.
But it is required to be 7 days after your meeting.
Yeah.
This is another thing that we'll see TEA come up with, a parent rights handbook that you all will receive. Here's your new training. Okay. All right. So I think the really the last thing that we, and again, we can talk through any of this. I apologize for going so far in depth into House Bill 2. Is let's see. I wanted to get to school safety because I think you all have some stuff that and student discipline. Those are the last two. And then again, if we have any time left over, or I can stick around. This I think is going to be a change, and then on the next slide is going to be a little bit of a change for you all, and really for all school districts. So Rep. McLaughlin, former mayor, I believe, of Uvalde. And so the response to that terrible tragedy really impacted him. This was a priority of his. This says that a detailed policy to respond to incidents are now required of every single agency that is right around a school district. So municipality, county, right, your school district PD, your school marshals, everybody has to have a policy as to how they implement or how they respond, how you do unification, everything. A lot of stuff you all are already doing, they're putting on, right, county and city police. Before it required meetings for particular levels of municipalities and populations. That's required for everybody now, between districts and appropriate law enforcement stakeholders. New facilities have to have that detailed security review as soon as practical. Same thing in your emergency response plan, that doesn't change. And then also there is a requirement on new training for anybody who is going to be a school security officer, right? So if you have somebody volunteering, or if you have school marshals, or if they're new to being in that security role, they have to go through this training, which we believe is going to be developed by the School Safety Center within, I think it's like 90 days, but they have to go through that training in addition to the some of the post-action reports and a new grant program to help get more folks trained. This is the other thing that I think will change, because in House Bill 3 from last session that required the armed guard at every single campus, it kind of left it open to say if you are claiming a good cause exception, then you did it, you're done. But Rep. King or Chairman King said now you have to take up, if you're doing a good cause exception, every single year. Now, if you all are fulfilling that requirement, then you're fine, right, as you guys write. But for campuses that don't, they have to take that up. If you have any campus or any campus that is not reaching certain school security requirements, then you also have to ask for that good cause exception every 5 years. That was also kind of left open to interpretation. Okay, let's go to student discipline. Student discipline is this House Bill 6, fairly controversial bill. Currently in school removal procedures, you have to have that repeated interference, right, documented, right? That's the only time. Then the next step, right, is removing the child, and then you identify the punishment, and then the child can go back to class. What House Bill 6 does is it says it allows the teacher to decide as to what that repeated interference is, or what qualifies for that, and for them to make the decision about when that child is removed. And it says that the student is only allowed to return to that same classroom with the written permission of the teacher. So, have fun there.
So the
no, I'm just kidding, that's terrible.
So the issue there is
Yeah.
that this is a state law, but that does not mean we don't have to follow the federal law of FAPE.
Yes.
Of what?
Of FAPE, the free and appropriate
Free
access
public
to.
education.
Yeah.
So if,
For
for
special
example,
education students.
that child's behavior was a result of their special education diagnosis, removing that child would be a violation of that federal rule. So there's going to need to be a lot of education to help support that you have a state rule that says if that child is a disruption to you decide that you want them out, and they don't have to come back in until you have this meeting where you in writing agree to. But we also still have to meet the federal guideline that they are entitled to that education and how that works. So it's going to be a lot of conversation, a lot of training, a lot of support, so that we make sure that we are in compliance of both state and federal laws.
Or
Does
state
the-
mandated behavior unit is.
Right. So you have to,
You
you
can't
have
go in
to.
my classroom, so I'm gonna move you over here.
Yes.
Yes. So
Because the
if
teacher
they're in
wants you in.
ISS doing schoolwork, does that education aspect comply with the federal requirement?
We still have to provide the special education services for that child while they're in school suspension. So it's
But
just,
And being
yeah.
in school suspension is not considered the same as your normal tier 1 instruction you would receive in the classroom.
right.
So if you are following FAPE, they need to have the same instruction all of the other children would get. Where in ISS, that's why you have a limited number of days,
Yeah.
because you can only do so many worksheets.
So actually, it removes the day limit.
And
on school
yes, it does
suspension.
remove the ISS day limit.
Now, that's new. You're absolutely right. Current law is that it is limited to a certain amount of days. That has removed it. It has also addressed or added exceptions to the out-of-school suspension for students in grades 3 or lower. And so there is more ability to put those students into out-of-school suspension. I will say in that interplay between the two, the bill's answer, which again, Julia does not necessarily agree with, is that you are required per the teacher to recreate, to your point, that environment in the in-school suspension or wherever the student is removed to. And so I absolutely, there is going to be a very difficult interplay between, right, what HB 6 is going to allow for your teachers and also what they're getting from a lot of the folks, right, like they're also receiving training outside of your districts. And some of that communication about this bill as well as teacher compensation, right, I think it's important for us to kind of stay on top of what the language is used and how different groups are training teachers on this,
Yeah.
right, versus how you all are going in with team effort. Here's what we're doing for each other. If we have a difficult situation, here's how Navarro is going to respond,
Yeah.
right? Like that becomes an important moment, I think.
That's what I was thinking as a teacher. I don't like a kid.
Exactly.
You know, I'm
That's-
done with you, and
Exactly.
it's easy now.
Yeah, it's
So, and I'm never going to sign to get that kid back.
Right.
You know, like,
Right, and I think
That's
that's,
what I said, now you got a different unit. And
Yeah.
yeah,
a
and I
bunch
think
of
that's the
teachers.
extreme, right? Because, you know, if I'm looking at the story of, you know, the AP that went in and had her eye taken out, right? This defends that teacher who says, you know, I was beat up by this kid 6 times before y'all deemed it was okay to let him go. I should be able, the first time he throws a punch at me, to say, let's go. So it is that conversation about, we want to support you. We don't want you in a situation where you feel threatened or the rest of the students can't learn because this child is dominating with their behavior, right? But we also cannot create a situation where, hey, there's this core group of kids that we've all decided we don't like them, we're not teaching them, because where do they go? And then yes, if they have special needs, you know, are we still honoring that and we're not getting a lawsuit based on a federal requirement? And so it is going to be a balance. It's going to be conversations. And I think what I do like about this bill is, although it will, you know, depending on how many we have, create some issues with meetings. But the idea is that everyone meets. The teacher, the parent, everyone comes together before the child has the opportunity to come back in the classroom, because we need to address what is going on that it led to, I felt like I had no other choice but to tell them they had to go.
Yeah.
So I think it's to your point, Julia, it is the conversation around what was the intent of the bill, how are we going to support in this district, and make sure that it is a fair and safe learning opportunity for students and teachers.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
The DAEP requirement for automatic, for VAPE that goes automatic DAEP has been removed. It is now a minimum out-of-school suspension rather than an automatic DAEP. There is also the ability within this disciplinary procedure for, to your point, the parent to have a conversation with the school to potentially lessen the discipline if they agree upon how they're going to lessen it, right? if they're gonna do community service or do, I don't know what else, but the parent then has to agree and sign and complete, right, in order for that disciplinary infraction to go down. That gives districts a little bit more, or campuses rather, a little bit more flexibility there.
What is our current, how do we currently handle?
We use the mandatory placement up to 45 days for that vaping because it's a requirement. It's a mandatory placement.
Yeah,
That's what it was.
it
yes.
was, yeah. It
So
was.
now it isn't mandatory. It doesn't mean we can't still place them, but it's not a you have to place them.
Yeah.
And what that was creating in a lot of schools is a burden on that facility.
Yeah.
And so they weren't able to place other kids because the whole place was filled up with vapors.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
it's really about starting to look at, is there an opportunity for them to get some counseling, to do things like that rather than
So
Throw
first,
them
the
there.
state required 45 days in DAEP.
A
And now they're
mandatory
saying,
placement,
never
yeah.
mind.
Mhm.
But
It's
they're
not-
not saying you have to out of school suspend them.
They are.
They are saying you have to
out of school suspend them. The flexibility comes if you have that agreement with the parent. So there's now this new disciplinary agreement, I'm gonna state it wrong, but I can look it up in a second, where if you have a student who, I think it's a mandatory certain number of days of out of school suspension, but if the parent is like, this is a mistake, that was my vape, or that was their
Every
big
parent's
brother's
gonna say
vape
that.
pen, right? But the
That's
agreement
silly.
is the exchange is something that you all decide what that is.
Yeah.
And then it's a requirement potentially of the parent and the student to complete. And if they don't complete it, then you can implement the out of school suspension. That's our interpretation of it right now. I imagine there will be some additional administrative rules on that and how to implement it. Because I agree, it's like, how do you prove?
So the
it was this-
flexibility didn't exist before. The parent couldn't make an agreement
Correct.
before.
This is, yeah,
The
that's.
districts could file for a district of innovation exception to not have to follow the rules. So does that remain intact?
That's a great question. I'm not sure the
I
answer, but
think you're
can
not.
find
I
that
think
out.
what I remember seeing or listening to last Thursday at the commissioners' call was that all the DOI that exempted you from discipline no longer
No
can
longer
be.
exists.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
as
think
you
that-
go to re-up your DOI, you'll have to take that out.
Because that's all, because I'm thinking, I mean, sending them to DAP was one thing, at least they still had a teacher and they were still in school.
Yeah.
Out of school suspension, they're just sitting at home doing nothing.
Yeah.
You know, so-
Unless you implement your virtual school.
So, yeah, so speaking of virtual,
Yeah.
you can implement your virtual school and require them to, you just get right out, but sign on to your
That's
laptop.
expelled students. Out
Yeah,
of school
well,
is
so,
not expelled,
but
that's
it's-
different.
Yeah, virtual school, but also for expelled students, so if do you all have an agreement with the JJEP?
Yes.
Okay, so you don't have to do this, but if your JJEP is full or does not have capacity, you can offer a virtual education
Juvenile
environment
Justice Department.
for those students. There is particular rules about making sure they have internet access, they have a laptop. You have to check on them every 45 days, and if there is an in-person space that's opened up, you have to ensure that they're offered that, or you determine whether it's still best for them to be virtual versus in person. Quick thing on cell phones, and then again, I've got tons of slides that you guys can go through because I know you're like, yes, I can't wait to read all of them, because I know that this is a big conversation. I want to just kind of talk through a couple of things. One is that it is because there's some conversations that I'm hearing. They're like, oh, we're not going to do anything with this, or we don't have to do. So early on, the discussions of this bill were only during instructional time. Right? The author of the bill, when it came back from the Senate, was like, nothing really changed. And I think my rookie mistake from, not that I'm a rookie, but like, that was like, oh, I know better than to trust the rookie from saying that. But what the bill actually did in the Senate is it banned cell phones from school property. Okay, completely from school property. Now, couple of things. There is also a notion that you all have to provide a safe space. In the bill, it doesn't say safe space. It just says storage. And it's not actually district offered, it's just you have to designate where that storage
That
is.
would be backpacks and purses.
There you go. It also covers not only cell phones, but it covers any communication device. So Apple Watches are actually listed and included. I think they took
You
out
have a pager.
pagers, so
Yes.
maybe a resurgence of pagers will come back. But anything that sends a message back and forth, right? I think that was saying anything that sends a message back and forth. So I guess pagers.
Now, Julia, I am seeing, and what some school districts are putting out is the earbuds and headphones as well, because they're able to receive phone calls from their phone in their
backpack.
storage
Yeah.
through that.
Or
So,
send messages through Siri. Yeah,
Yeah.
potentially, absolutely. So what you all have to do is you do have to adopt a policy. So I think there is school board, we're just saying, we'll just do whatever. You all have to have a Navarro ISD policy
Correct.
on cell phones. The important exception that I will say is this safety protocol. So a lot of school districts, the pushback was, hey, we've implemented, like if you have an emergency, right? Like if you're having a mental health crisis, you can call this number.
Yeah.
Or if you see something, you should say something and you can text this number.
Or Stop It app.
Right, exactly. And so that is, I think part of that, the reason why we're going with backpacks is because the exception is that's part of our school safety's protocol. You have the option of doing that. I also think parent concerns about in our new school safety world that we're in, your children having access in case of emergencies.
Correct.
However, you do have to detail the discipline policy if a student is found with a phone and is not doing something that falls in that health exception.
Correct.
So is it possession of a phone or use of a phone?
Possession of a phone.
So was
That
there
is
any
out, that you can see them with it out, utilizing
Well,
it.
was there any
was
language for the
use, not
students
possession.
who have medical
Yeah, that's
devices
use.
that are
It just
hooked up to
can't
their
Or just
phones?
out.
It just
Like
can't
if
be
I
out.
reached into my bag and I
There
get
is-
caught,
Okay.
But
The bag is
There's
considered
those are two
storage.
really different things.
you can't
Yeah.
see it. It
can't
can
see
never
it.
be seen.
on school property.
Correct.
At any time. So freshmen can't
But
call
you're
his
talk-
parents at the baseball field to come pick them up.
If we're after school hours. So if we end at
That's- okay, that's not
4:05,
that part, okay.
yeah, so if we end at 4:05 and they take it out at 4:06, school day is over, they're good to go.
But if I have a child who has anxiety and I so put it in my 504 that my
Yeah,
child has
correct.
anxiety and they need to be able to contact me at any point during the day, and I just put that in and my kid can pull out their phone anytime during the day and call and text me.
Because it's in the 504 or
We
it's
will
in our
have an
IEP or a
influx
medical
of those.
professional has said that they need it. Which ideally would be like those things like your Dexcom where I check it and it tells me, oh, my blood sugar's off, right? But I could also have a doctor that says they have anxiety and this really is like a security blanket to know I could call my parent at any time. And so now that goes into my 504.
I mean, my child has a dog that went to college with her under that auspice, and she doesn't need her dog. She just wanted a dog to live with her. So we'll have some cell phones like
Well,
that.
and we did. We've had
I mean,
folks pointing that out.
yeah.
That that's
It's a
that's
combination.
that's an out.
So I think the only thing I just want to let you know, the rest of the stuff that I have in here, so you guys can go through it if you'd like to. As Dr. Epley knows, I'm available anytime you all need me. I think I have my cell phone at the end. I've included, did not pass, that's why it's in red. I should probably put did not pass. But you guys can see what is proposed for academic accountability. Some other things that were, kind of very small. This, I think, will be interesting about chronically absent. You all have been required to manage chronically absent students via administrative rule. It's now in statute. I think will be more strict. And it's added to the at-risk factors, although since there's no direct spend requirement anymore, I'm not sure that that necessarily impacts you all a lot. A couple of requirements for AI training for employees and offices of state agencies. And then we have a couple of commissions that are coming up that will report for next legislative session, including the one on teacher satisfaction and retention, which I think will be very interesting. And that's it. I do have an appendix which has lots of other slides that, again, I know you guys are like, thank you.
And
I love that, but I'm happy to address it. I
Yes,
know
we're
way over.
gonna get all of this. The one I do think that will relate to retention is the curriculum review that a parent can call for. of their teacher
Say
once
that
a
again,
year.
the what review?
Curriculum review or instructional review, so that I can, one time a year, say, Julia's my child's teacher. I'm hearing a lot from my child that they're not learning anything, they're not doing anything. So I'm requesting to see the last week of instruction. So I'll see the lesson plans, I'll see what was provided in Google Classroom, I'll see the worksheet that was given, whatever that might be. If that is not assessed to be State Board of Education, TA approved materials and curriculum, it can be sent to TEA to be evaluated to see if it's on grade level. And so every parent would have the right to review that one time a year for that teacher. But if you think about if every parent in the class does that.
There are some teachers where that probably would have been good though.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that, but I think it's also us helping our teachers to understand when we've moved to a state adopted curriculum like Amplify, it's actually going to assist you, because then it's much easier for you to say, yes, I'm using Amplify. Here's all the lessons from Amplify.
Yeah.
And so that ends that, because we are using the state approved curriculum.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
What about SD 409, the one that said we couldn't go back for a bond if it failed?
That did not pass.
It didn't? Okay.
Yeah, it did not pass.
Cool.
And I think that's the kind of the last thing I want to say, because I know
Yeah.
we talked about it. Obviously for us, when we're looking at bringing bonds potentially every 2 years because of our fast growth, was really that special session related to what is his authority in bringing stuff back, that everybody kind of took a breath about. We didn't have some of those bond restriction bills. I know there's one on defeasance, but the way that we have tackled defeasance with this board, we already bring that vote to them, so that's not going to be a problem for us.
Yeah.
But anything you can kind of give us some insight on with bond restriction or potential to bring some of that back.
So he has the ability to do any amount of stuff to add to the call. My impression with a lot of the bond stuff, so one of the big bills that didn't make it, and this is my kind of, Governor Abbott can be unpredictable at times. But House Bill 19 is kind of my temperature check on this. So House Bill 19 dramatically changed the way that bonds are taken up by any taxing authority. And it was a limit on how much debt you could take on. It was a requirement on when the election could happen. There was an attempt at some point to put in like a supermajority in order to approve particular, I think it was from the board level, not from the constituent, because everyone knows that's pretty impossible. That bill did not even get out of its first committee.
Great.
Right? So it has to go through all of those stages, committee, House, other committee, Senate, or vice versa. It didn't even get out of the first one. Same thing with taxpayer-funded lobbying, or what they're referring to as taxpayer-funded lobbying. A lot of that didn't really even get a little bit of movement. It got a little bit of movement in the Senate, so there's not a lot of support for it. Not just it's like a Republican-Democrat, right, like partisan issue. It's in order for us to run our city, because it's all taxing authorities for House Bill 19, this makes that impossible. And so I don't think that there's a significant want to go back and revisit that, as far as I can tell at the moment. The question becomes, okay, well, if he's not going to tax cities, or if he doesn't want, or he or Lieutenant, whoever is writing the bill, this was Chairman Meyer's bill, if they're going to do that, maybe they're just going to attack school districts. When you're in a special session, everything is under a very big microscope in advance of a campaign season, right? And so it's just something to kind of talk about the interplay of like, what do they want under a fine microscope, and if there is a bill that specifically attacks public education on the tail end of vouchers, and a bill that is $8.5 billion but somehow only increases school districts, right, budgets by a blip, right, like that is not going to necessarily be, right, the best thing for him to invest in, right,
Makes
his
sense.
time. That doesn't mean that I do think it will come back up next session if we have a similar makeup at the Capitol. And the reason I think that is because of that facility usage report that you all are required to do. It is in Senate Bill 12, but it also is in House Bill 2. But also because the elections or anything to do with bonds There are now, I think, 3 different, database, that was the word I was looking for, a database on taxes and bonds issued by each taxing entity. That's House Bill 101. Here's another one about the Bond Review Board must post information to their website on bond election. TEA has to now maintain a bond, tax, and project database that includes all information on the following. So there are multiple places where we will see like a statewide repository about how many bonds and tax ratification elections are happening. And so I think that
You're
potentially
geared up
funnels
with some
into a
data.
larger conversation about, our school districts out of hand, right? I do think that makes our conversation around here's how much we have to spend, right? So that allotment for basic costs covers transportation, utility, insurance, and I'm forgetting one, but it's a fairly significant umbrella of all the things that you all have to pay for no matter who attends, right? Like that's the idea of disconnecting it from attendance. That's your first opportunity to say, hey, here's how much we spend on all of this stuff. And here's how much the state gives us, right? I think that's where we really have to hit it with our community in terms of communication and what we're doing at the school district in order to push back against this, right? Because in the background, there are organizations that are saying that school districts have access to, and I wish I was making this up, $92 billion. And that your budgets have grown, right, exponentially over the last 4 years or 6 years, right? Now, they're conflating all the property tax, right, bills, because the way that you lower property taxes is you put more money into school finance, right? Doesn't change the size of the bucket, just change how much water who contribute, right? You remember that, that metaphor, right? And so that, right, conversation in the background and this, right, makes our individual community-based conversations all the more essential, right? I have made this joke way too much where I think about school finance like an onion, where I like cut it and I cry a little bit, and then there's like still more layers, right? We're like, oh, it's still going, right? But I think we all need to start cutting into that onion, right, and crying a little bit. Not really, you don't have to cry. But I think we all need to, you all are those leaders that can go out into your community and say, here's what's going on in Navarro, right? Here's what's going on. Here's how much money we got, but that goes right out the door to teacher compensation. We love our teachers, but here's how much we have a gap between, right, our utility costs and what we get paid for by the state, right? Did you know, my fellow neighbor, right, that we only get paid around 20% funded for transportation versus what we pay for our school buses and our fuel? That's the kind of stuff that becomes now essential in this backdrop, right? And so that's the same thing with bonds, right? On the face of the facility usage report, this repository, right? Our communities have to know our data better than this repository does in a way, right? And what that bond is used for.
Any other questions or anything that you knew there was a legislative update on that we have not touched on that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I am available to you at any time, and so if you do have questions, or if you want to come back or do whatever that I can do to help you all in any of this, I'm available to you at any time. So thanks for having me out. Sorry I was late and kept you over, but just put it on your timesheets.
No, we appreciate it. It was a lot of very useful information. We need to have these conversations, so we appreciate you being. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to come out.
And I will make sure that you all get a copy of Julia's PowerPoint so that you have that.
Yeah, so we have trouble falling asleep at night. But cool. Well, it's nice to. I know we didn't get officially a chance to meet because I wanted to jump right in. But thank you for all you do. In all seriousness, I know you guys get paid zero, but you're doing just incredible work for kids. And the amount of time that you spend in representing them, you all are really truly going to be key to these next few years and trying to really tell the story of what's going on in public education. So thank you for the work that you do and for the leadership that you share with the school district.
Thank you.
Hopefully, I think
Yeah.
it stopped raining, so that's everybody
There you
gets
go.
safe. Yeah.
Yay, win-win.
you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you.
Okay, the time is 7:37, and we're going to take a break before we go into called closed session so that everybody can use the restroom and do what they need to do.
Camera will keep going until you call close, just so you know.
Okay. The memory. Closed session, and I can't call closed session and then let us leave the room to go use the restroom. So that is still on.
So you still
Just letting everybody know.
So when do we go to start that trip?
No, now.
No, now, not during closed session, please.
Program is in code. Very end is a 20.
No, it doesn't. Everything shuts down during closed session.
Comp ed is 24. Orientation is 22 is CTE.
Oh, perfect, thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay,
but yeah.
awesome, and then I will, when I get that, I'll make sure I send it to you so that we can kick off all of the academic plans.
Yeah, it's you know, it's
And
frustrating.
then we'll get those updates from TASB,
Some of
but
it,
the ones that we have to have an immediate
trying to
policy,
look at where we're funding what.
we'll have to start the page and get that
Some of it
going.
is, it could be this or it could be this.
Okay, awesome, thank you. I thought that would help you just get a sense of it without.
That was all, that was one thing, even though we're all. gonna
It's just,
still
yeah,
track it,
collecting it all together in one spot.
Because there was a whole.
I'm with you, for sure, thank
We
you.
give y'all all the comp ed money, but
All right.
It never seems like y'all spend it all. Well, it's because we're
Can
using
I
that comp ed
use
money to
your
cover all the.
Oh, of course,
Okay.
yeah.
Give us
If
a
you
little
go
money
through
for it.
those double doors, you're gonna
You're
turn to the left and then to the right, and it's the last one up there. Before you see the
So you
doors.
had, so that, you tried to.
It should be,
Not
it
as much.
should help.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
It seems very complicated, but it's not.
Okay, and I'll be right back and I'll get out of here.
Yeah, no, no
You don't
worries.
get enough money for it. It's like,
How was your week?
It was good.
Good.
It was good.
security.
Is that yours? Did you bring?
Yeah.
Yummies?
Yeah.
Yum.
15, 30.
No,
They gave
yeah.
us less than, like, 80,
No, it's been good.
$90,000.
It's just
It's costing us already $300,000.
knocking everything down. I met with Dwayne today.
Yeah, but they can secure.
Just trying to talk through capacity. It's like, well, we have to know what your property values are, and then we have to see what we sell these ones for. Because I was like, I gotta start planning the next one.
Yeah.
So, how much money I'm allowed to have to use.
So
It's still recording.
it's only 5.
Yeah.
They think they might be able to get to 60.
Yeah, that was one of the laws that had.
And they said they'll
Hey,
have
Paul.
to. Thanks, Paul.
Yes, I appreciate it.
We'll have to see. But he's like, maybe 60 days. But here's the problem, because the whole harmless ends,
What's the little
everyone's
number
gonna be
tracker on
helping
top of it? What's it?
that have bonds. And remember, you have people who have to make So we're
Yeah, that would be
you know,
great.
we're joining the whole pool.
Yeah.
So
They're probably-
the big thing now is get out. They can see But he did say because the market is fairly stable right now, and they are stated investments, he thinks will be good as far as like no one's gonna leave it on the
Keep the
table.
number for the women.
Yeah. We decided to go to war with Iran, who knows?
Responsible back
You know?
We're gonna pay for it,
But I do.
but you're responsible for
do
what the
think,
money goes to.
Correct.
That's the only way
Well,
we
we
could
have
logically
to
do it.
because
Because if not, it would have been
the,
$80,000.
athletics facilities moving so quickly, we're already getting bills.
Oh,
Pay.
Oh, they're like, we're stopping.
Yeah, exactly. We cannot stop them. We are moving ahead, so you want to make sure.
You have the picture, yeah, I can,
Yeah, you can see the
Yeah,
outlines
yeah.
of the field, so they've totally, they're rebuilding that.
Yeah,
Because they dig it out to the base, and then they go and they pull up the select field from the football, and are bringing it back to solidify back to the level that they want. So it's really fascinating to see how. Yeah, they move like the stuff that's usable from the site. I mean, it's
I'm gonna call us into closed session in about a minute.
oh, yeah.
She's in the bathroom, so she's gonna come back through. I just want you to
So we were having that debate. Does she get to keep money or does she roll it over?
let her be able to leave before
Because
we.
you can roll over leftover money to
Yeah.
the IRA. I'm like, that is it's technically our whole money.
Oh, yeah.
And I will be in touch because.
Right, and I haven't taken it. It is one. How would I do that? It wasn't fair because Matthew had a core scholarship and
Right.
he finished in 3 years. So
That saves some money, yeah.
saved for that. You know. Well, it's discussion. And that's not your bit.
I write my last college check this month.
Yeah, you made
So I
it.
was
It's only like $7,500.
I was
It's like, no problem.
technically, the Texas Tomorrow Fund and the 529 are my money.
Right.
But it's in we're having that discussion right now. I don't think my kids get a say in it.
She graduates in December and she's on
It's
her
not
own.
like they're doing any additional.
Get married 3 months. He said, you got 3 months to get on your feet and then.
No, she's still gonna be living at the house. We're not remodeling an apartment for her to live in. I mean,
But yeah, but it's more
bad
so,
enough, but-
I keep asking Cassie about that.
Mary's an apartment.
Attorneys are gonna create, they're doing a template for
oh,
that.
they didn't wanna,
And I think
they
you
don't wanna
guys
spend the
can
money
go
on the
with
apartment.
consent.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it doesn't
you
have
have
to
a
like
unique
come
mine
up,
are.
you know, dramatically.
I know, but I
That
have
would be
one.
fantastic.
You're welcome.
I mean, my son's in South Carolina. I can't even imagine.
Thank you, Julia.
And
Have a safe
Mary,
trip home.
this company's putting her up in one of those suites until they find out where she's going. So
Right.
she's in limbo right now, which is good.
I did put,
So are we enclosed now?
No, just
Yeah.
about.
I put a term limit on the apartment. I said it's,
Okay, the time is 7:44 and we're going to go into closed session. Pursuant to Texas Government Code, Section 551074 and 551072. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Discussion and development of Board of Trustees goal and evaluation metrics, to discuss the duties of the Board of Trustees, the duties of the superintendent, to discuss the employment and resignation of personnel to include teachers and other professionals, and to deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. Any action that we take will be taken in open session. Is our live stream?
Really on that.
We need to
You're
get
gonna be a
this.
contractor somewhere.
Okay, the time is 9:50 and we have returned to open session. Are there any motions? There are not. So with that being said, it is still 9:50 and our meeting is now adjourned.